series and where we talk about how the body works and how it's designed and things that can go wrong and things that can go right and how we can fix things that go wrong and all those good things. So any questions or comments as we're going through this? It is interactive, and we should probably even make a online chat or something so people can type in questions. I don't know how to do that, but that's just an idea that came to me. So when we start, we always start from the beginning. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." The term in Latin is lux. It means divine light. It can be interchanged, light, life, or a divine light, okay? And the verse I always use in reference that uses it in the Latin text is John 1:4. It says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of men." So, we didn't have this technology, of course, when those words were spoken, but we didn't have this technology really until about 10, 15 years ago, where we could take a picture and an image of an egg at the moment of conception, okay? And at the moment of conception, we could see, no, back up. There we go. What did I do? Okay. That one right there, okay, that's the egg, okay? Before conception, and all of a sudden here, at the moment of conception, and it looks like that in color, okay? They said in the beginning that interaction between the sperm and the egg produces light, but actually it's a field. We talk about light in 3 phases, the particle phase, the wave phase, and the field phase. So this is actually a field that remains. It doesn't just flash and it's gone. It remains. So we know what about fields, that we can program infinite amounts of information into that field. In chiropractic, we call that program, we talk about programming information into that field. That program that runs and maintains our body, we call that innate intelligence. It's like the AI of our body, okay? And that program is present in that field. So at the moment of conception, now that program, that innate intelligence, which in chiropractic, that really defines what is a living thing, what is alive. If it has that innate intelligence, it has that field and that program, now it's a living thing, and that is going to run that program, basically, okay? So that cell now, because it has all that information contained within that field, knows how to reproduce. So those cells start reproducing, all right? Now, they're generic cells at this point. They're all the same cell type. We call it a stem cell, but they're the same generic cell type, okay? And it goes from 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4. They go all the way to this point where now, within that program, we didn't know until we started looking into those fields that this information is actually not contained within the DNA. There's no chemical signal that we can see, but it's contained within that field, that at this point, now those cells start to differentiate, okay? Which means they become different type of cells. And the first different cell type is the nervous system. So the nervous system is the first system that differentiates and is created in the whole making of that human being. So the nervous system being the main control, but also communication network in our body, carries information from that field, okay? It receives it and it sends it. It's a receiver and a transmitter, okay? That's what the nervous system is. So the primitive streak, they call it here, is actually the spinal cord, and then up here is where the brain develops. But that tissue type is specialized to receive and send information, okay? So setting up communications is really the first thing that any living thing does, even in a plant, all right? It sets up that communication up the trunk or up the stem, and then branches grow out from there. and at the end of those branches, that's where the fruit grows. Well, in our body, that is kind of what happens. All those cells are still reproducing, okay? Most of them are generic cell types. Only that nervous system is specialized. But now the nervous system receives and sends that information from that field, from that program, out to those generic cells to tell them, now you're going to become a bone cell, okay? So then protection, bone, wraps around that nervous system to protect it. And now those branches grow off and they go out to what they call the peripheral cells, those cells on the edge. And at the end of these branches then, organs form. Okay, like the fruit. So that information being received and then sent out to the ends of those nerves, and at the end of the nerve, that's where the organ or the tissue, if it's a muscle or if it's a heart, cell or whatever, it forms at the end of those branches. All right. So that goes on at just a miraculous pace, and right up until like 12 weeks now. That's At 12 weeks, everything is pretty much there. It's not fully developed yet, but that baby is now, pretty much functional at that point in utero. And those cells, again, start to degenerate and regenerate. So at that point, they start to replace themselves, okay? That baby has been growing up to that point. But at a certain point, usually it's around 90 days, most cells in the body are receiving that information from that program that now you're supposed to turn over, okay? So that it's called programmed cell death. It's that cell gets that information. Because you're this type of cell, here's how long you're gonna last. And at this point, that cell turns over, okay? So that those cells don't wear out, so that they're always staying nice and new and healthy. Okay? Because they start to incur damage at some point from just, radiation, gravity, stuff like that. And they can heal, but after so many nicks and, damage, eventually that cell is a poorer quality. So they turn over, all right? And that's where we introduce the concept of a generation, all right? One generation of cells in the body. Usually, most tissues, it's around 90 days, but as we'll see, not every tissue. But I just want you to be thinking that most of the time when we see healing in the body, what's actually happening is those old cells that have been damaged, they die off and new cells come in to take their place, okay? That's what healing actually is in the body for the most part. But if you could see your body the same, or as it really is, you never see it the same way twice, because 98% of the atoms that were there just a year ago, they're no longer there because those things are being interchanged in and out of the cells. Bone cells, for example, remain somewhat constant, but again, you get a new skeleton roughly every 90 days, okay? Your skin, so most of the skin cells slough off when you do stuff like that, and then they're being replaced, but you have basically a new skin every month. Your stomach lining, so the actual part that comes in contact with the food when you're eating it, every 4 days, but those surface cells that secrete the mucus on the surface, mucus a lot of times has some cellular component to it. Every 5 minutes that's turning over. If you think about it, it's contact acid. So if it wasn't constantly being, overturned, that turnover, it would be so damaged it could never be repaired and you'd end up with an ulcer. Which is in fact what happens when you get an ulcer. That information isn't getting to those cells to turn over. Those cells do get damaged and then we end up with an ulcer, okay? So you get a new liver every 6 weeks, you get new red blood cells, you wear out about 10 trillion red blood cells every second. There's a lot of red blood cells floating around there. But this program that tells our body how to do that and when to do that, it's the expression of intelligence through matter. That's the chiropractic definition of life. And B.J. Palmer, the guy who developed chiropractic, said the master maker of the human body did not make you and then run off and leave it masterless. There's that intelligence, or that AI, if you want to look at it that way. It's a program that runs your body, okay? And it communicates through the nervous system. So that innate intelligence, I liken it to a program or an AI, because we can understand that now in this day and age. So the inborn ability of a living thing to adapt forces and matter for use in the body in order to maintain the body in active organization, right? So that's what that intelligence does. That's what that program does. Adapt forces and matter, okay? So what are some of the forces that are on us right now, sitting in this room, that we have to adapt to? Or, yeah, gravity's the big one, right? A wise man once said, nobody's safe since gravity was invented. So gravity's something that we always have to adapt to. Now, what would be an example of maybe a run-in with gravity that we probably can't adapt to? If we don't adapt, if this doesn't work, if that intelligence or that program is unable, or maybe your body just doesn't have the resources to adapt to that stress, then damage occurs, okay? And we call that a subluxation. That's a fancy word for, in Latin, sub means less than, and lux, remember, is that divine light or life, and ation means to be in a state of. So it's basically saying you're at a state of less than 100% life or less than divine light, okay? That's what that subluxation is. But a run-in with gravity where we're not able to adapt to it. Like if you jumped off this roof, probably too much force for your body to adapt, and you're gonna be injured. That makes sense? That's kind of how these things happen. But it isn't always that extreme. Sometimes it's I'm walking down the stairs with a basket of clothes, and I think that I'm on the bottom step, but there's one more step left, and I step and I go, whoa, like that. That extra step, subluxation that happens sometimes. It's just that your body puts out this force expecting to meet something there, and it's not there. And there's an imbalance of forces, and sometimes your body can't adapt to that, and there's injury. So that subluxation happens sometimes. So above, down, inside out is just reference to that flow of information. Okay, it's from that program, from innate intelligence. The brain receives it, doesn't create it, receives it, and then sends it. Okay, it sends it out to the periphery or out to those cells and tells them what they're supposed to do, and then gets that information back by way of the nervous system, and then it gets fed into that program. That algorithm tells it what to receive and what to send. So it happens no other way, from above, down, inside out. And again, we have technology to be able to look at this in real time now with some of these PET scans. When they stimulate somebody's leg, they'll notice, okay, that area of the brain fires light. Okay, they stimulate the arm, that area of the brain. So they're thinking that, in the beginning, before they knew anything about quantum fields and electromagnetic fields and really the fields, they thought, okay, we can assume that area of the brain is creating this light, sending it over the nervous system somehow, but no. It's receiving it and then sending it. It's actually not the creation of light, it's the receiving of certain frequencies of light from that field, okay? So we're able to actually see that field now. So now it answers a lot of questions, because before any of that information existed, there were theories, but it was all just conjecture, but now we can actually see it. Before that, DNA got a lot more credit than it probably deserved. And now we realize, okay, DNA only just codes for proteins. It doesn't code for functions and actions, okay? It codes for proteins. So all the actions that your body is performing, it's received by way of the brain and then sent over the nervous system. So that nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, okay? So those messages get sent down the spinal cord and then out the nerves to those different parts of the bodies and different cells. And again, in that baby, when it's developing, it sends that message out to this group of cells here, which is generic, Okay, it's a generic group of cells, but now that information comes from above, down, inside out, saying you're now going to be heart cells, and they differentiate into a heart. Okay, but what happens if we cut that line of communication? What if we severed that nerve going up to that group of cells? Is it going to get the message? No. Is it going to differentiate? No. Okay, they do this in lab rats where they'll, bisect a nerve and see, is that organ going to develop? And it doesn't. Duh, right? So what happens if we choke off that information going to a group of cells, even in an adult, is they will a lot of times revert back to a generic cell type, okay? Because they don't know what they're supposed to be, or it's not getting that message. And they don't know when they're supposed to turn over a lot of times either. So they don't know their function and they don't know their lifespan. And what they do is they just keep on growing and keep on reproducing. That's what genetically they're programmed to do, okay? But they don't receive any of that other information that comes from that field, okay? So a group of cells, a generic group of cells that grows and reproduces and it never dies, what do we call that?
Stem cell.
Huh?
Stem? No.
Well, that group of cells, we would call it a tumor, okay? So in the body, that tumor represents a breakdown in the communication somewhere because those cells don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They're not getting that information. So they're doing what genetically they're programmed to do, grow and reproduce, okay? Now, those bones of the spine are supposed to be protecting those nerves, making sure that they get their message out to that part of the body, but those bones of the spine are movable, and when that happens in this spine, if it moves out of position and it puts pressure on that nerve, let's say severe car accident, it severs that nerve. What's going to happen to that organ is exactly that. It's going to atrophy. It's going to usually die, okay? So in extreme cases, that's the type of thing that we'll see, but a little less than that, usually that function just keeps getting worse and worse over time, like every generation, okay? Because those cells turn over, like a heart cell lasts about 90 days, right? So those old cells, they're getting that information, but the next generation is getting less because that information is being choked off by that subluxation. So that next generation comes in, and it usually comes in smaller and it comes in weaker, okay? It actually comes in more generic is what's happening, okay? So over generations, those cells will continue to atrophy and they'll just revert back to that generic state. Unless somebody comes along and finds that and turns that information back on to that cell, okay? And then it'll regenerate. So this is the graph that kind of represents that. Up here along the top, we have 100% function, 100% life. That's what our body was created to be at. It's all the breakdown in the body and all the build up in the body. All the cells that are dying, all the cells that are coming in. It exactly matches, and the body is at what we call ease, okay? But right here, let's say that's our trauma. We just stepped off the step, we walked across the street, got hit by a car, whatever it was, that now it's breaking down that flow of information, and the body isn't getting that, okay, we have to rebuild message. So those cells are just subject to what we call universal forces, like gravity, like radiation, like, erosion, basically. So those cells start to break down, but they're not getting the message to build back up. So the breakdown exceeds the build up. It's not sitting equal anymore at ease. It's breaking down more than it's building up. And in chiropractic, there's a term called dis-ease. It's not a play on words. It's dis meaning to go away from, this ease, that balance, okay, that homeostasis, equal breakdown and build up. So dis-ease doesn't equal a full-blown disease, but it represents a state of incoordination, all right, where the body's not getting that message out to all the parts, so they're not in coordination, okay? So that's like the number one function of the nervous system is to coordinate all the different parts. If it didn't, you got like, 500 trillion cells in the adult body, if there wasn't that nervous system coordinating all those cells' functions and telling them what they're supposed to do in relation to every other cell in the body, we would just be a puddle on the floor, okay? So that nervous system, getting that message out, that's what keeps our body in that coordination. That dis-ease is just the beginning stage where there isn't that coordination anymore. But left over generations, now we usually start to see dysfunction, symptoms show up as a result of that, and that's usually the symptom or the effect. That's usually when they will label us with a disease, okay? If it has symptoms, you can be put into a box, right? And that box, whatever it's named, that's the disease that you get labeled with. And it's nice sometimes to know what's going on there, but it can also be a curse. Like I've noticed when I get somebody in who has been labeled with MS, okay? Usually they're not gonna get a lot better when we're working on it. Even if we're doing a great job restoring that information going out to their arms and their legs, and the nerve flow is better, they're not gonna get a lot better. But if they come in and maybe they have all the symptoms of MS, or maybe they've been labeled and they just don't believe it. They don't buy it. They're like, I don't think I have MS. If we can kind of teach them that, okay, it's possible that you don't have MS. It's possible that you just have a subluxation that's causing the symptoms of MS. If you can accept that, now there's hope, right? If we remove that subluxation, those symptoms get better. And take it for what it's worth, those people that take on that mindset, they get better faster. They usually have like amazing results under simple chiropractic care. Simple meaning we're not doing any rub-a-dub-dub, we're not doing any therapies, we're not hooking them up to electricity or anything like that. We're just removing subluxation and they're getting better from those MS symptoms, okay? So, interference with that transmission, like I said, leads to that dis-ease. It's not a full-blown disease yet, but it's that subluxation that leads to that. Like the picture here shows, that information going out there, it's less, okay? And then every generation, because it's a degenerative process, degenerative meaning every generation is getting worse now, okay? So it takes time for that kidney to get from something like that to, 20 years later, something like this. It just doesn't go there overnight. But it starts with some usually simple breakdown in that communication where now that group of cells isn't getting that information anymore. They turn over, the next group of cells is less. They turn over, the next group of cells is left. And eventually we end up with something like that. It's not overnight, but a lot of times what will happen is a person will get a symptom for the first time of kidney disease or something like that, and think, oh my God, I just got this kidney disease. I can't believe it, I've always been so healthy. We haven't been necessarily healthy, functioning at that 100% mark for like 20 years. In this instance, we've just been symptom-free. So that's one thing that I like to kind of try to get through to people is a lack of symptoms does not indicate the presence of health, okay? We define health as like 100% function or normal function, your body functioning at its normal. That program being expressed through your body, remember the definition of life in chiropractic is the expression of that intelligence through the matter, all right? So if that intelligence hasn't been being expressed at 100% in your body for 20 years, there's going to be some breakdown there. So we haven't necessarily been healthy for 20 years, but symptom-free. And unfortunately, a lot of times, what we're taught is we just battle those symptoms. Okay, if you come in with that disease name, all the symptoms on that list for that disease, heart disease, let's say. Okay, what are the symptoms of heart disease? High blood pressure, high cholesterol. Those are the big ones, right? So do we got drugs for those things? Dozens. So if you come in and you've been labeled with X, Y, or Z, now we've got a pill that we can give you for those symptoms. We could get rid of all those symptoms, and that's what the research usually shows is people are dying with low blood pressure. That, you know, the deaths every year in the U.S. from heart disease just keep going up, all right? But now people are dying with low blood pressure and low cholesterol, because I think just that philosophy, that the symptom, getting rid of the symptom, that's going to be the answer. It doesn't restore the normal function, though. Okay, the underlying cause of that breakdown in function, it's still there, getting worse every generation. Okay, so number one cause of that subluxation is actually the birth process. How many have been through it? We were all born. So that's why we encourage people to get checked for those subluxations, that breakdown in the communication, but also get kids checked for, and I say checked, like put an emphasis on that, because has every kid that I ever checked had a subluxation? No. Okay, even some adults that I've checked will be, you know, clear, but they're the lucky few. Usually we don't get through childhood without some, you know, semblance of a subluxation. Sometimes it's a simple one, sometimes it's complex. But I want to leave you guys with a story and an action step. The story is about my very first chiropractic patient, Duke. When he was born, he was developmentally delayed, but by the age of 19, that meant that he walked slower and talked slower. He lived with his dad down in St. Paul, and one day he was walking down the street, and a group of 4 guys in a car, supposedly this is like gang related, but saw Duke walking down the street, noticed he's different, jumped out of the car and started harassing him. Duke tried to run away. Remember, he's slower. He got down this alley where they caught him, and then they started beating him up. And they beat him until he's on the ground, continued beating him until he stopped moving, continued until he stopped breathing. Picked him up, threw him in a dumpster, ran off. And by some miracle, somebody saw this whole chase occurred, called 911. The cops got there, they find him in this dumpster, not breathing, no heart rate, you know. Get him out, start CPR, the ambulance gets there, they were able to get his heart beating and get him breathing again. They stabilized him. But he was in a coma from that beating for 4 months, and when he came out of that coma, he was paralyzed. But it wasn't like neck down, waist down, it was his entire left side, his face, arm, leg, everything, flaccid paralysis, they call it. On the other side, though, this sounds like a stroke, right? It sounds like a brainstem injury, but most people would say a stroke because it's that hemiparalysis. But what wasn't like a stroke was the other side of his body had just this severe searing pain, like it was on fire. So he wakes up from this coma, screaming in agony, and they're giving him morphine. They're giving him drugs to kind of dull this pain so that they can run these tests, try and figure out what's wrong with this kid. They're trying to put a name on it, okay? He's got these symptoms. He doesn't fit into any box that we know of. So we got to find a specialist who's seen these symptoms that they can put a name on this, rather than, you know, because then we've got symptoms that we can treat, right? He went on like that. You know, he didn't die. They took him down to Mayo at one point to have a bunch of tests run, and they keep coming back with a no verdict. We don't know what's wrong. Like, we can't put a name on this. We don't know, you know, diagnosis for what you have. And they gave him morphine, which is like saying, hey, your kid's gonna die. You know, be comfortable while it happens. But he went on like this for over a year. After the first few months, his dad said it just literally, the pain drove him out of his mind to the point where he's now drooling and he's a vegetable. And his dad's feeding him through a tube. And he's just withering away. His body's just degenerating, okay? Especially on that left side. It's much smaller than the other side because atrophy and degeneration. A friend of his dad said, why don't you get your kid checked by a chiropractor? Which is why I said, get checked, right? He didn't tell him, go get Duke adjusted. He said, maybe you should get him checked, because he knew a little bit about subluxation. He knew a little bit about the nervous system. He knew this kid had a trauma, okay? More than that his body was not able to adapt to, all right? So he knew that there's gonna be a subluxation or two there. And there was more than one, but the one that I found first, this is a fiber optic view of the brain stem at the level of the first cervical, or what we call the atlas. So I find that subluxation, my chiropractic supervisor at the time didn't want to touch him because his dad literally carried him in laid him on the table, take his shirt off, he's scars head to toe. He's drooling, the eyes laid back. He looks like he's gonna die. And I'm scared to touch him, but supervisor said, yeah, he's scared to touch him. He says, he's your patient, John, do the analysis, adjust what you find, don't expect much. That's his sage advice. So I find this subluxation, I do the analysis at the top where that top bone protects the brainstem, and we take him down and we x-ray it, and it's like a 3 millimeter misalignment. So all these MRIs and CTs and all the scans that they're doing, they're not looking for a 3 millimeter misalignment. They're probably not even going to see a 3 millimeter misalignment on an image that big of a CT scan or an MRI. But I get a little excited because it's the first real patient that I've had who wasn't a student. So I want to adjust this subluxation, and I only know how to do it in the chair. He can't sit up. So there's 3 of us holding him up so that I can get my thumb on that bone, and it just clumped right in. And I'm all proud of myself, like I just adjusted the subluxation. And I look at my supervisor, and I look at his dad, like expecting, you know, and his dad goes, like, that's it? I'm thinking he probably wants me to hook him up to electricity and do all the other stuff that most of the time. But I said, well, you can bring him back in a couple of days and I'll check him again or adjust him again if you want. And he's Hmong. I don't speak Hmong, but I'm pretty sure he was cussing. And he picked him up and he walked out the door. And I'm freaking out because I'm thinking, this kid's gonna die. I'm the last one who touched him. Who are they gonna blame? My career's over before it even started. But a week from that day, I'm sitting down reading the funny papers with my feet up on the table in the student lounge, and my supervisor comes running into the room and he's like, John, what? He's like, Duke's here. And I went, thank God he didn't die. He goes, you gotta see this. So we go running down the hall, open up the door, and there's Duke sitting upright on this table, big smile on his face, and his dad's over in the corner, just bawling. And he said, a week from the day that you gave him that adjustment, he woke up and he wanted to walk again. And he's got strength on that paralyzed side of his body, and he's got no more pain on that pain side of his body. And they called that a chiropractic miracle, okay? And I've said it before, I believe in miracles, but there's no such thing as qualifying evidence. This is a chiropractic miracle. This is a medical miracle. Either it's a miracle or it's not, okay? But I believe that this is the miracle. This is how the body was made. This is how that program was written to run the body, and that communication system was designed to run and coordinate the body. And if there's interference with that, it can look pretty miraculous. Just turning that, you know, getting rid of that interference and turning that power back on to the body. It looks pretty miraculous. But that's chiropractic. It's just simple, you know. Most chiropractors don't even do that. They just do, like I call it the flying 7, where they lay you on one side, crank you one way, flip you over, crank you the other way, do 3 cracks up the middle, spin your head left, spin it right, manipulate every joint. That's not a specific adjustment. That's a general mobilization, like we talked about. That's osteopathy, really, and physical therapists use it. There's value in it because it'll increase blood flow, but it's not going to turn that information back on, okay? So a specific adjustment is what's required for that. And there are a handful of specific techniques. Even in St. Cloud, there are 3 other, well, not even counting Dr. Jason, but 3 other techniques that I know of represented out of, like, there's over 200 named techniques now, but there are specific techniques out there. So I encourage people to get checked. We do that at no charge for the people who watch this or sit here, anybody that you guys refer in. And we do the entire exam x-rays, and then I usually do 2 free adjustments to let people kind of test out our adjusting technique, okay? Because it's different, and some people love it and some people don't. But you get checked by us, you don't love it, I'm gonna make sure that we find a specific chiropractor in the area that we can send you to, that, you know, whose technique is gonna work for you, because that's really the goal, is to get people checked and then get them help if they do have that breakdown in that communication, okay? So with that, I want to thank you guys again for sticking around. Thanks for coming. You were trapped here, so you didn't have a choice, but thanks for joining us live. We'll see you next week.